All right, Abs, how we doing?
Yeah, really good, Tom. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you so much
Good.
for coming on.
Absolute pleasure, Tom. Honestly, pleasure's all mine. Really glad to be here. Really glad.
No, it is a pleasure, and it's my privilege. What we're going to talk, what I'd like to talk today to you about, Abs, predominantly, amongst other things,
Mm,
is spirituality, because I think that's been the basis of our relationship uh, since we met quite a few years ago now. Um, it's it's something I think that you have incredible thoughts and feelings and insights towards spirituality, as I do. Again, that's what's kind of bound us together over the years. But in particular with you, I'd love to get I'd love you to share today your thoughts and feelings on spirituality, amongst other things, because you are indeed a medical doctor. So I think
yeah.
in particular you are a good person to talk to about this. But before we get into it, Abs, if you wouldn't mind just giving everybody your a 60-second rundown of yourself in
No, no problem.
in any
No,
words you
Tom.
choose.
No, thanks. Firstly, thanks for the really kind introduction. And I think there's a lot of truth in what you said using that phrase spirituality. I know it's got lots of meanings for different people, but I mean, for me and probably for you, it encompasses a lot of the similarities that we share in life together, hence why our friendship formed and it's always moving forward. Um, at such an exciting and fun rate, which is something we both enjoy. So in terms of myself, so I was born in India to medical parents, mum and dad. Came to the UK, so to South Wales, which there's a bit of commonality with our histories there
Hmm.
as well. Grew
Yep.
up there, finished school, and then ended up in a sort of circuitous route, ending up going to medical school. That journey in of itself took me to Europe and then eventually to the Caribbean, where I did my medical degree, basic degree. Ended up coming back to the UK, and I now live in the suburbs of Birmingham, where I'm a GP in the Midlands. So, in a true sense of the word, a holistic doctor
Hmm.
uh, at this point
And how important, Abs? Thank you. How important, Abs, is spirituality in your work?
in my work.
Yeah,
I think it's incredibly
because you and I can
important.
talk about it as friends. I mean, you're
Sure,
not my,
yeah,
I'm going to continue to call you Abs, by the way. That's okay. That's what I call
yeah. No,
you.
of
But for the
course, yeah.
sake of the,
Call me
Dr.
whatever you
Abhiraj
want.
Susarla is your full name, but for the
No,
sake of
but
this, we'll
yeah,
call you Abs. But yeah,
no,
obviously you and I are, we're friends, and you're not my
yeah.
doctor, and we can talk spirituality all day long. But I find it very interesting. How much do
Mhm.
you allow it to enter into your work with your patients?
Um, so recently, since I've been discovering or rediscovering, as we were talking about earlier, more
Yeah.
of that. I think it's incredibly important. I think a good sort of, you know me, Tom, I'm not great at statistics. I'm not a numbers guy. But if we throw out a few numbers, might put a bit of context to what I'm about to say. So, of all disease that happens, 5% has a direct causal effect with genetics. So, if your father has the disease, you will get the disease. That actually only accounts for 5% of all diseases known to mankind. 95% of all of these other conditions and diseases are what we call epigenetic diseases or conditions. So, by definition, they are subject to um, environments and experiences and different factors which can sway these conditions in either sort of direction.
So lifestyle
um,
choice would be in there as well, I imagine.
Lifestyle choice would be one of the factors, of course. So that really makes the whole thing really interesting because in general practice, most of my work is to do with actually chronic disease,
Hmm.
and so that's where this whole concept or the idea of spirituality is so important. Um, for many, many reasons, um, because then that will lead on to the methods, ways of managing one's mind and body, which I think the sooner we all start to see that as one, um, then I think you really start cracking open the kind of cover with this whole thing, and you start seeing it for what it really is.
So you mentioned in your introduction that you've clearly traveled quite a bit, and more than just traveled, you've lived in different countries.
Hmm.
I mean, you originate from India, your parents are Indian, you lived in the
Hmm.
Caribbean, that's where you studied amongst, I believe, Eastern Europe. You studied there as well, and now you're living
Yeah,
here in the
briefly.
UK briefly. So you've
Mm-hmm.
seen and you've moved all over the UK as well. Now I know that amongst different geographies, you've also worked in amongst different, shall we say, different areas in terms of affluence.
Hmm.
So I'm curious to know, in from a physical point of view or a medical point of view, how things
Hmm.
change depending on your geography and depending on how capital rich your environment is, but also does how correlated is it with spirituality? Like I'll give you an example. So if you're working in is it if you're working in a less capital rich area, uh,
Hmm.
presumably you're going to get different diseases, sure, than you are if you're in a very prosperous area. But is it more difficult to find spirituality? And I guess you could say preach spirituality into these, depending on where you are, from a geography standpoint, but also from an affluence, if that's the right word, standpoint.
Yeah, I understand the gist of the one question, which has 12 different limbs to it, but no, I
Oh,
see what you're trying to say. So again, if I just kind of break it down a bit more simply, just to kind of lay the bedrock. So overall, life expectancy in the Western world has improved for two primary reasons: one, sanitation, and two,
mhm.
vaccination programs. Those have been the main reasons as to why basic life expectancy has gotten better. And
So
another,
almost proactive and reactive measures, keeping
yeah,
things clean,
and
and then
keeping things,
indeed being able to treat things
yeah, so
after they
people aren't
happened.
dying of, a lot of these diseases which they were. The other big thing is the um, Western medicine, if you like, um, in this day and age is very good at fighting acute disease. It's by far the greatest thing in terms of fighting acute disease. So if you break your leg, you go see an orthopedic surgeon. If you have a heart attack, there and then, when the attack actually happens, you need Western medicine. If you've got a pneumonia, you need antibiotics. So Western medicine is very good at that. And along with the sort of advent of good sanitation and vaccination, we are where we are.
Yeah, sure.
Which
So just
which
define acute medicine for me, or
so
acute.
when the
What did you call it? Acute.
so acute issues. So
Acute
when they
issues.
happen,
Okay.
yeah, and that we need to be a bit careful, because where do you draw the line between acute and subacute? But usually uh, the way I like to look at it is not the acute manifestation of a chronic disease. Okay, so a true acute event would be you walk out of your room, you just trip and break your ankle. You just need some plate and screws in there,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
you just pick up a bad bacteria, food poisoning, and you need treatment for it there and then. That
Yeah, there's
hasn't
no
been.
deeper meaning to it. Almost, it's just like it's a very sort of binary thing. This is what's happened, and you need a treatment for it.
It's happened within a short space of time.
Okay,
There was no real premise before that, if you like,
got
if
you.
that makes
Okay.
things a bit more, clearer.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
then going on to the really interesting bit, um, in terms of chronic disease, then differentiating between places of affluence. I think what affluence allows is, if I keep it quite simple, is that the rates of stress and anxiety um, in place of affluence from a sort of primordial, primitive sense are less because the idea of staying alive is established. Um,
Mm-hmm.
because human beings are resonating with the idea that money will keep you alive in this generation and multiple generations before us, but even more so now. So, without realizing it, the way these perceptive organs work, your sight, your smell, is relaying a very different message to what you're thinking, to then what emotions you're having, and the behaviors which drive it.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, the behaviors which are driven by it, I should say. And so, in that sense, that's a very kind of superficial way of looking at spirituality, if you like, in the very tangible kind of aspects of it. So, physical health, and if you want emotional health, things are generally just a little bit calmer because you know you're not going to die. And
Mm-hmm.
that does a lot of things for you, which is the area where I'm exploring, in terms of the regulation, the emergence of, and of course the cessation of chronic disease. Whereas if I flip that in areas of financial, social deprivation, the exact opposite is happening. Um,
Wow.
and so that then really just opens up the complete field. You see it for what it is. So when you, if I was to use an example of um, somebody who's not doing very well, let's say, the other big fact I will make with this as well is that these concepts of memory, so whether you want to call it memory in your body, memory in your mind, emotional memory, are generational. Okay, so the good things that happened to your father and the epigenetic effect that that had, back to the point about the 95% genes, are actually passed down through generations. So I'll give you an example. There's a,
Yeah.
I think it was it the study of cows where they found a particular flower, very intoxicating, beautiful smell. And what they did about 6 generations of cows before it, every time the cow smelled that flower, they electrocuted it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Okay.
and it was down to the 6th generation which would not go anywhere near that flower
Without
when
without
historically.
no electric
So
shock, just they just
so
inherently knew
inherently, yeah, because
that's not
this
what we don't go towards that smell, that scent,
bad scent. Why? It's
bad
never
scent.
happened to us. It's never happened to us. And that can happen, we call it vicarious learning, but it also happens, through generations as well. So you've got this person, using the example, who has probably had these aspects of their genes passed down to them through consciousness, if you want. And this is the spirituality aspect of it, because it's, how do you measure this, and it's immeasurable. However, we do know that that's the baseline which they're starting from. Now that can be altered according to the person's own mindfulness and how they want to manipulate their own genetics to an extent. But then they're put in this situation where their perception is overloaded. What I mean by that is that they're put in a state where they are seen to not have much. They believe they don't have much. They are thought to think that, and that causes the stress cycle to start from very young. And so every
Mm-hmm.
action that they take in their life after that
It's coming from a
is
place
one.
of, you could almost say, scarcity.
Scarcity,
Yeah.
exactly, or relative scarcity, according to what they see as reality, what they've been told as reality, which will shape their thoughts, which will shape their behaviors, which will shape the way they act to also quieten those thoughts and those behaviors as well. Alcohol, drugs, certain types of food. And
And indeed inevitably lead to a different set of illnesses.
indeed, and that is
Yeah.
the conclusion of this chapter of one story. So I just find it interesting that cancer is massively on the rise, um,
Mm.
alongside depression and anxiety and stress, which also seem to
They're
be
correlated.
massively. I think they're correlated, and I can give you biological reasons why, which is where my area of interest, if you like, goes. So, with the aspect of spirituality, that's just a term for what is, for the thing where everything is experienced. You could call consciousness, awareness, whatever. By finding a way to tap into that state a bit more often, you identify what is the real you, and you start recognizing what is not you, which I will leave open to interpretation. What is abundance and what is not? What is a real life threatening event? What is not? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and etc. etc. All the paradigms through which human beings view the world. Um, and so when you tap into that state, what it does is makes marked changes in your um, mind and body through manipulation of hormones, enzymes, which are really important in allowing the body to be at homeostasis, which is where the body wants to be, which is the body's natural, neutral, happy set point. That's all. That's all we're trying to do. But a lot of people are so far from it, and of
Right.
course, all of these conditions and such develop.
You said something there that was quite interesting. You said, I think the words you used were "go against the body." Is that what you said? I think so.
In what
But
context?
well, I was listening to a doctor speak on a podcast the other day, and he was saying that if you go against the body, I think the example he used was if you get your typical uh, polite person that
Mm,
doesn't want to offend anybody, and
mm-hmm,
just sort of goes with the flow, kind of a yes person, if you like.
mm-hmm,
Uh, they even at the even if it goes against themselves to not offend somebody, they might say something that goes against them, uh,
sure.
and keep silent about it.
Yeah,
And but you're within yourself, your body knows that that's going against the body,
it's
and there
stress.
it's
It's
right,
stress.
right,
It's
right,
however you want to, give yourself stress.
and that can lead to serious
Yeah,
illness. That can lead to, I think,
seriously.
and he said that can lead to cancer.
Yeah, absolutely,
To be
absolutely. So,
to go to the extreme end of it.
I mean, this is a sort of, the much more biological medical aspect of it, but I suppose it'll be helpful because I'm speaking in assumptions, in the sense that even from a biological point of view, because of my background, and I'm trying to be careful not to, to do that, because I do forget things sometimes, especially because I know you know so much medical biology because of our previous conversations that in order for it to be probably a bit more universally understood, I should try and explain a few things. Um, but the idea of stress is being driven by one limb of your autonomic nervous system. So, your autonomic nervous system is the system of nerves, if you like, which are functioning independently of conscious thought. You've just picked up a glass of water and drunk it there. You've decided to do that. But in terms of where that water goes in your body, how it's processed, your heart beating right now, the breaths that you're taking, the bile acid that's coming out of your gallbladder, the stomach acid, the pancreatic enzymes, that's not under your control. That's all regulated by your autonomic
Automatic.
nervous systems. So, what you have control over in terms of your
Conscious
uh,
control.
conscious control, if you want to cause it, which is a paradox in and of itself, because you actually have control over the whole thing if you were in consciousness. So the term conscious control is a terrible term. It's
Okay.
actually contradictory. But your somatic motor system um, actually doesn't cause much issue in life in terms of killing you. It's not likely you're going to get a cancer in your bicep, or some sort of issue with your muscle that's going to end your life in your leg, but everything in your torso and upwards and a little bit below, um, if that goes wrong, then obviously that can be quite life ending or life threatening. So what I'm saying is that your somatic nervous system, let's just use this awful phrase, conscious control, is
What phrase would you use?
I would say somatic, because
Somatic. Let's go
it's
with that then.
somatic nervous system. It's movement. It's controlled movement, which yeah, controlled movement essentially. So the other aspect, your autonomic nervous system, there's this balance between your sympathetic nervous system and your parasympathetic nervous system. To put it simply, fight or flight, relaxation. Now, if I quickly touch on the fight or flight area, the sympathetic, as we know, both limbs of this beautiful system are necessary for existence. The sympathetic nervous system should be um, activated, or will be activated at times when it's needed to.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need to think about that. If a lion walks into your room right now, damn right your sympathetic nervous system should be activated, because it should just get you out of that situation,
Mm-hmm.
or go and kill the lion yourself.
Yeah.
It's fight or flight. Um, but the autonomic nervous system has huge benefits in terms of, your parasympathetic limb of your autonomic has huge benefits in terms of um, relaxation, healing, immunity, cell regulation, programmed cell death, aging, the list goes on. However, for most people, it's lightly turned on for maybe 5 or 6 hours of sleep, where it's just trying to catch up
Mm-hmm.
with the amount of damage that's been done by this complete, unparalleled, unregulated sympathetic drive. That by the time you wake up again, the sympathetic nervous system is back on, and the parasympathetic nervous system never gets a chance to do its good. And so, with mindfulness, spirituality, meditation, yoga, I use the term yoga loosely, but mind body connective practices, Tai Chi, the traditional sense of yoga, where you see people doing the positioning and all of that. The whole idea of that is to try and upregulate the parasympathetic nervous system and let it do what it knows, what it's supposed to do, and what it does so well without any thought. And so most of chronic disease is a lack in that, basically.
So when you let's say you've got a patient that uh, that comes to you,
Mm-hmm.
what would you tell them? Uh, aside from I'm not being a medical person, being an
Mm-hmm.
engineer, I would call it the physical element of it. So aside from the physical element of it,
Mm-hmm.
and again, not being a medical person, I can call it as very. I appreciate this is very, I'm oversimplifying it, but in terms of the spiritual side of it, I guess. So, for example, to use that example that I just used, let's say you've got someone that is full of stress because
Mm-hmm.
they're being, shall we say, bullied by their boss, and they're too nice to sort of to do
Whatever
what's good
reason,
for them.
whatever you want to
Yeah,
identify, yeah, as a cause of
yeah,
stress.
and where is there a system that you have to including spirituality to help them? Like, how would you treat something like that? And what would you tell them to be afraid of from a medical sense? Like, what could happen?
So, I mean, from a medical sense, it's pretty obvious. It'll be the turning on of a lot of these epigenetic issues, so genes which could be quiet for heart attack, strokes, and diabetes until you choose to turn them on at 105, will be turned on much more earlier in a life, and so that's pretty obvious as to what will happen for a lot of these molecular reasons, which I've lightly sort of touched on. But you get the gist of what I'm trying to say. The uh, mental aspect is interesting. When I say mental, the mind aspect of it is quite interesting. So if we look at our molecules of emotion, so the people who found these protein-like structures, which are now, as we know, dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, opiates, which elicit an emotional response. They were coined molecules of emotions. We actually have receptors for all of these peptides, neurotransmitters, chemical messengers, um, all over our body, and all parts of our body are capable of producing these. So the idea of ecstasy, attachment, happiness, well-being, it's as much in our body as it is in our mind. That's just the first sidetrack sort of point that I'll make. But if you recognize that essentially these thoughts are all happening in reaction to the perception, the perceptive field, your five senses, and the thought then is the ego. So it's assigning a meaning to these, what you see, smell, taste, touch, and hear, which will then drive the emotions based on that. If you recognize that all of that is not your true self, and these are basically stories which you've
Avatars. I
written,
like to call them avatars that you
avatars,
kind of
yeah,
uphold to
that
sort
you,
of
yeah, uphold.
disguise and navigate your way through life, trick your way in some respects through life.
That's right. And the more then you're able to touch into the real you, so through mindfulness and spirituality, consciousness, awareness, whatever, you then have the choice to give whatever meaning you want to these thoughts, to identify with whatever you want to, and it actually gives you a lot of freedom in that respect, which is very difficult on a conceptual level. And that's why in terms mindfulness, consciousness, meditation is not something that you need to understand. It's probably something that understanding is a good first step of where it fits in. But then once you start experiencing it, you realize that is the place from which everything else happens. So it's a complete sort
It's
of
almost like it's the
reversal.
center of everything.
It is the center. It is the center. It's almost like for the this has been quite a biological conversation, but if we take it down to the physics aspect of it, it sort of boils down to the idea of non-duality, which a
Hmm.
lot of physicists are now the space, the irony of the word, the space at which they live in, which is that basically you are 0.1% of atom. The rest of you is nothing. Everything is nothing. And so whatever is there is just consciousness. And consciousness is not subject to space or time. So if I destroy the room that you're in now, the space is still there.
Right.
You see what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah,
So,
yeah.
and the way physicists look at this is that when they break the atom down to quarks and qualia and everything like that, all they realize is that basically in between all of this, most of this is just nothing. Most of this is just space. And so it's more of a concept of like, you're not in the universe. Actually, the universe is in you. It's your perception of it. Without you, there would be no universe.
Hmm.
Without you, there would be no London Bridge. Where is the London Bridge? It's
Right.
you see what I'm saying? It's in your
I almost
perceptive.
feel like it's inaccurate to say you and it
Exactly.
on the basis that there is no you in it. There's just
What's the
it.
most common? What's the most common word in the English language? In any language?
Tell me.
I.
I.
I am this. I am Tom. I am Abby. I like pizza. I went for Chinese food. I.
Right. Right. So
What
for
is that?
me, yeah, what is that? So I think for me, the I is relative to myself, my unique sense of being sentient
Mm-hmm.
on a physical on a physical plane in the physical universe. I've always never really detached myself physically from the
Mm,
rest of matter, from the rest
mm,
of you know. Like I'm not a doctor, I'm not a physicist, so I'll use the term matter loosely. I don't know if that's the right
mm,
word, but the universe, I can say that, I suppose.
mm,
But at least on on a sentient plane, I
mm.
suppose at very least it's what I refer to. It's how I would define the word I. I is just referring to your unique sentientness, if that's a word.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, who
And
knows? Maybe maybe like within the physical realm, maybe the sentient realm. Again, we'll call it that for want of a better phrase or a better word or
mhm.
whatever. They're all uniquely that they're all similarly connected. Who knows? But
Yes,
relative to me, and
yeah,
relative to you, I
yeah.
have my sentient being, you have your sentient being, and there,
Mm,
and even in that sentence there, the word I use the word I.
mm, exactly. But this is, I alluded to it earlier in the sense that, you know, can't, if we sort of try to describe consciousness, which has no, it's not subject to space time, which is
Hmm.
a crazy sort of human concept, and it's
It operates almost
not,
outside of that.
well, there's no boundary to it. It's almost sort of indefinable.
Hmm.
That's where then sort of you kind of feel the aspect of the reason why you and I are connected, why you are connected with everything else sentient on this planet. And it goes back to why helping other people helps you, because you
Hmm.
are other people.
Hmm.
And when you start spending some time contemplating a lot of this, um, it then you ask the question, how would you help people with mental health issues? Then you can almost reverse engineer this to say things like pain happened to you at a certain point,
Hmm.
trauma happened, that's fine. And, we are human, we sense trauma. Somebody dies, grief is a very human thing to experience, and you should
Hmm.
experience it. But then, and that's pain. But your decision to hold on to pain and to replay the video every single day is what is
Hmm.
called suffering. You have
Hmm.
complete control as to whether you want to suffer or not. You have complete control right now whether you want to be happy or not. The only thing
In
stopping
what
you,
way? In what way?
if you understand that all of these thoughts, emotions, and what you see, smell, taste, are not real, then
Hmm.
make whatever reality you want. It's as simple as that. So why not, while your physical mind and body are here on this earth, why not make it
But what if you bring
a
things in the physical? Sorry to cut you. What if you bring
yeah, no,
things
no,
in? What if it's more than just a memory? What if it's a memory, but that there are physical elements to it as well that exist today? So, for example, let's say you have an unfortunate accident where you're physically disabled.
sure.
Yeah. So there
The
is a
way I
physical.
that so the concept of, and this then leads into the concept of death, which is
Hmm.
the area you're exploring, and you're probably thinking, why is he talking about death when I'm talking about getting a limb chopped off? The reality is that the Tom Morgans that existed yesterday is not here anymore. In 6 weeks'
It's
time,
just a
your liver.
projection.
No, no, no. Very, very, not even metaphorically, very literally. Your liver cells in 6 weeks' time, every single cell in your liver, so billions of them, are going to be all completely replenished. New cells. The cell that's with you right now, they're dying at a certain rate. Your skin is going to be completely different within every single skin cell, couple of billion or whatever it is. They're all going to be completely new. Your red blood cells, 3 month turnover, every single red blood cell carrying every little molecule of oxygen is completely new. So the
So on a
idea of
physical plane, like what you call them cells? What are the longest lasting cells before they renew, regenerate, or whatever?
nerve cells,
Nerve cells. Okay, how long do they
nerves
last?
and cartilage to for an extent, but um, they can, well, and this is the whole area of neuroplasticity and kind of focus training of regeneration, and again, it's a field where um, kind of spirituality, consciousness, awareness, it's
But throw
not
a
been
number on
explored.
it. Like, will they last a year? Will they last 10 years? 100 years?
It's very variable. So you know
Okay.
the whole kind of, you fall off a horse and break your neck. Some people don't ever walk again. Some people walk. I mean, there is an element of, you do a critical amount of damage. Remember, this is the difference between acute illness and chronic disease. Acute illness you can't account for. I go outside and somebody puts 6 inch machete, into my body. The amount of critical damage is just too high to physically come back from. That will be the end of me. Simple.
Catastrophic. Yeah. Yeah.
Catastrophic, yeah. But avoiding those sort of events, then if you kind of understand the concept that you're always being replaced. So, when you
And
say,
that's where I was going with that, abs, by the way.
yeah,
So, let's just say that, let's just say before it regenerates, renews, whatever, is
mm,
reborn, the
mm,
the longest lasting cell in your body is a year. Then you can say this
mm,
time next year, I'm going to be on a physical plane, a completely
mm,
different me. The only
mm,
thing that remains is the, as we've established,
mm,
the I, which is the sentient nature of myself.
which is you right now. The
Right.
present you is the only I that will ever be. The words that are gonna come out of my mouth by the time I finish saying them don't exist anymore.
Hmm.
So all we have is
Is
right now.
all we have is now. The power of
Exactly.
now.
Yeah, the power of now, which is just the same concept.
But
Um,
memory. But I'll remember this conversation.
you'll remember. Yeah, you'll remember it. It's fine. It's memories nothing more than you tying together and storing information. The memory of the actual conversation can be, the specifics can be whatever, but in terms of, if you want mental health, it's the emotion that you tie to it that is going to cause a cascade of events that'll cause a positive or negative effect.
Right,
If you
okay.
look at,
So that's led me perfectly into something that I wanted to ask you. So let's take you still there, Abs?
yeah, yeah, sorry,
Cool.
my battery
That's all right.
playing out.
Yeah, if you need to plug in or anything, no problem. Just go right ahead. Let's take a patient of yours, sort of a generic example of somebody who is carrying trauma with them. Let's say it's from childhood, or let's say it's from
Mm-hmm.
a previous bad relationship. Who knows, right? Or maybe a
Sure.
physical injury, but they've physically managed to recover from it to the point where
Mm-hmm.
you wouldn't know. It hasn't
Mm-hmm.
affected their life in the present moment, um, but they're carrying trauma with them.
Mm-hmm.
They're carrying it with them. Um, that I totally get what you're saying. I totally get what
Mm-hmm.
you're saying, but at the same time, it's difficult for someone to
Mm-hmm.
just
Yeah,
drop it.
I get it.
It's
Mm-hmm.
and maybe you can, the way I'm putting this across, maybe you can hear it I've got a certain level of that in my life. There are things in my life
Hmm.
that are certainly in the emotional sense. I call it emotional baggage. There's emotional baggage or emotional trauma from my past that I carry with me
Hmm.
today. It does exist today in some physical sense,
Hmm.
um, but certainly emotionally. And in conversations like this help. Like I totally understand that it's 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 completely meaningless because it doesn't
Hmm.
exist.
Yeah.
However, this is where I was going a moment ago with memory.
Mm.
The memory of it exists, and those memories invoke the same emotion, but today. And I would argue, actually, they don't get better with time; they get worse because I
Hmm.
think it's suffering. I think you used the word suffering. You don't.
Yeah.
It's prolonged. You get bored of your own pain. You get bored of
Yeah.
your own, fed up. And I've
Yeah.
described it also as um, having a an unwanted roommate or an
Yeah.
unwanted flatmate. You
It's
want
it's an
you
un
want them
it's an
gone, but you can't
unwanted
evict them.
it's an unwanted roommate, an unwanted flatmate who is going about their routine on autopilot,
Right.
because
You just want to be
because
free
the
of it, but every day they wake up and they're telling you the same tale that's driving you mad. The tale you don't
they're
want to
telling
hear.
you, they're telling you the same tale, which is causing a release of neurotransmitters, chemicals, which are affecting your body, like you mentioned,
Hmm.
which then in turn are releasing a set of neurotransmitters and chemicals, which are affecting your mind to say, make sure you play that video again in the morning, will you? Thanks. Okay, cool. And
Oh
so this
wow.
cycle just keeps going and going and going and going until you, and until it becomes, so the reason why you said that it becomes harder as time goes on is if you start
Excuse me.
expending these sympathetic, when I use the word sympathetic, I mean it from a biological, nervous, autonomic standpoint, neurotransmitters, organs take a hit after a
Hmm.
while. Your brain is just an organ, your heart is, your bowels are all the same thing. So it is understandable why, you know, um, things get worse with time in terms of suffering. It
Yeah,
would
I
actually
do worry. I do worry on occasion that have I got enough of it that's going to cause me a cancer or is going to cause me an organ problems. Like, yeah, I've
sure.
told you before that on occasion I get severe stomach cramps,
Yeah.
which you and I have we've spoken about this. I'm absolutely confident with every
Hmm.
fiber of my being that they're related to stress rather than just something I've eaten or a medical condition that I have.
Certainly. Yeah, of
Because
course.
I know
Of
that
course.
because my body's telling me that, on a deep
Yeah.
level, it's like this is what
Yeah.
this is. It's not.
Yeah. They
You're
always
not.
they always
You're not
say
allergic. You're not allergic to spice or cayenne
no,
pepper or
no.
something like that you had earlier or whatever. It's definitely something that you're worried about.
I mean, a great saying in these sort of ancient traditions, which is translated to English, is kind of, listen to my gut instinct.
Right.
It's stronger than your mind's instinct, because your gut hasn't learned to sort of double screw yourself with thinking yet.
Yeah.
You
Or
know,
talk yourself out of
your
it.
yeah, your gut is quite
Hmm.
good, because it's giving you just the physical message without the thoughts and the emotions behind it, which is what the mind likes to do. You know,
Hmm.
you can turn an aspect of a physical pain into pleasure if you tell yourself that it's pleasurable. There's certain, should we say, sexual preferences and experiences which people enjoy, which involve certain whips and sort of things. But it's a good example of, you
It's
know,
actually a really good example. Yeah.
but it's the and that sort of sequence, that framework, if you like, just to keep it non-ethereal, followable, applicable to people's lives, of perceptive senses, the thoughts you assign them, the emotions that causes, and the fact that all of those three things are fundamentally just non-existent. But that's what people like to do, and quote unquote, we all do it. Just every now and then, I like to wake up to realize, okay, I can see what's happening here, and it's a little bit like I can choose for it to um, happen within me in a different way, and that's what I'm trying to bring to the table in terms of it. You do
You can
understand that.
manage it. You can manage it.
Well, fundamentally, it is fundamentally the crux of the issue is that you know human sort of suffering in that context is completely self perpetuated. It's not always self inflicted. The inflict of the pain, can be for lots of different reasons, but it
Like a
definitely in
childhood
terms of
trauma, for example. If
childhood
you,
trauma, yeah, yeah. I mean, children are amazing because they're great at they're great at being very they're very conscious beings. You look at your own children,
Mhm.
my own children, our children. They're wonderfully conscious. They're wonderfully in the now. Um, it's the reason. Oh, I don't know where I've gone. The reason why um, childhood trauma, I feel, actually turns into trauma into adulthood is because of the it's what they learn. They have learnt that this was a traumatic experience for them. Inherently, they don't know. I can go quite deep on that,
Mm.
and it's probably quite a disturbing topic. But
Mm.
let's just use something a little bit more lighter for the
Mm.
sake of it. But for example, say you know children are just in play, and or babies, are in play, and another baby scratches a baby on the face. They feel the physical pain of it. They feel the perceptive impulse of it, but they don't assign meaning to the fact that your 9 month old or my 9 month old or whatever little under one baby won't assign the fact that I've been abused here. That's a
Right.
concept that you've introduced to that child. Do you see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It was just a physical sensation that
It's
happened.
your reaction to it's your reaction
It's
to
your
it.
story that you let them know that, and then you condition them
Right.
well enough, then they'll believe it themselves. When in reality, it was just a physical thing which happened in a moment in space time. And it is a moment, even if it was an 8 year long divorce of shouting and screaming and smashing alcoholic, but in a relative sense, 8 years is not even a flicker of a second in terms of time, really, if you really want to become a bit spiritual about it. But
Right.
again, I'm trying to
Right.
keep the practical implications of what I'm trying to say. So, I mean, it's all about, you've kind of written, you believe these stories to be true, and it's given you a certain result. So why? And I'm assuming that a lot of people are not happy with that result. Otherwise, they wouldn't be very upset, teary in my clinical room, or anywhere else where people are crying and obviously emotionally, sort of disturbed. So why not write another story which is actually accurate, which is true, because it's coming from a place of consciousness, um, rather than from a place of perception, thought, or emotion, which are all non-existent. Um, and along the way, you have a great time of life with it, or a much less painful time of life.
Yeah. Let's go back there. I'm really glad that.
I'm just going to get you to hold that thought for 1 second
Sure.
because I'm good to be back. Need a bit of fluid
Tell
break.
you what, Abs, you've really allowed us into what is quite the library of knowledge that is your head today. Every time we, every time you go as deep as you have, it reminds me just how much you know. It's 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 wonderful. A bit intimidating, intellectually, I
No,
suppose, at
it's
times,
it's
but it's
useless.
more wonderful than it is.
It's this sort of understanding it in an intellectual standpoint. If there is no, basically, if there's no action taken over it, it'll do one or two things. A, just confuse the shit out of you, and B, ultimately useless information, or B, it can really start to cause mental health issues itself, because you get into frames of, this can be easily misconstrued because a lot of it is left in that open place of, you now have a blank palette, what do you want to do with it? As such, you can go crazy, or you could say, I want to paint a very beautiful picture. um, so, because then people get into the notion of, well, then I'd question if they don't understand it properly in the first place. But in terms
Right.
of, you know if you're, well, exactly, like if you're hungry, like a great thing, like a lot of, if we say ancient Indian tradition, I don't want to call it India, because India is a very different place to ancient Indian tradition. But the first question an elder woman usually would ask you, if you were visiting their house, in a village in India, the first question, do you know what it would be?
Tell me.
Have you eaten?
Okay.
Because if you've eaten, that means you've taken care of the one of the most fundamental tenets
Physical
of
necessity.
physical necessity, right? So, like,
Right.
you can't start forgetting about shit like that, like eat, sleep, drink, fluid, you know, exercise, move your muscles. Like, in order for to actually lead a actual joyful life, you need things like a functioning body. And we've obviously talked a lot about healing and this sort of thing, and regeneration and all of that. That's fine, but you need to put your body in a state where it's primed to do that. You know what I mean? Like, there's no point knocking
You've
back.
got to take care of base business.
Exactly. You've got to take care of base business. That goes without saying. And that
Yeah,
sort of thing.
if I may, it's actually interesting. I was talking to my wife about this just earlier today. So I think, how's it? What's a good way to start here? So I think a personal belief of mine is that a man. I can only speak. I feel I can only speak for men. I don't know if this is true for women or whatever. But I think what a man fundamentally, what I believe a man fundamentally needs, um, is to be call it spiritually complete is purpose.
Hmm.
I really do. I strongly believe that. So
Me too. By the way, I agree.
yeah, like I think that I think we're designed to be able to cope uh, with a certain amount of with a lot of pain, with a lot of
Hmm.
suffering. But I heard it beautifully put recently. We can, we're designed to cope with stress, but
Hmm.
it almost needs to be in service of something, and
Hmm.
that something is indeed your purpose. So I
Hmm.
think that a couple of things. I think that way back in the day, where every day was a fight for survival.
Hmm.
Um, you know, very different stresses. In as much as would I sooner be in that situation than the situation I find myself in today, where literally surviving, physically surviving every day is a real thing. Like I'm not sure I'd want to be there. Like I say, different stresses. That said, they were much closer to purpose back
Yeah.
then. Whereas take my life today, or take a lot of people's lives today, they sit in front of a monitor for eight
Hmm.
hours a day and try and work out what's their purpose. Like, what are we contributing? What are we, what's the point of all this? Like, um, it was interesting what you said about an elder saying, "Have you eaten?"
Mm.
What I find really interesting in Western civilization is when you meet somebody new, one of the first five questions you'll ask somebody new is,
How are
"What
you?
do you do?
Or what you do? Yeah.
What do you do?
Mm.
What do you do?" I mean, I've always found that really, really fascinating. I think there is
Yeah.
so much emphasis in the Western world on on your I call it your You can call it your job, your career. I think for me, I take that to a deeper level. It's your
Mm.
contribution to society. That's ultimately what a job or what a career is. You're contributing
Mm.
in some way to society. So I find it really, really interesting, and it is very much in our culture, and I think people put as a result of, I think the culture puts emphasis on your contribution, and therefore people put emphasis on their contribution to the point where they try and find their purpose in their
Mm.
contribution. And I don't necessarily, it can be, it's your purpose, your true purpose can be within your contribution, but not necessarily. So for example, for me, like you, I'll give you an example here, a couple of examples. I have children, as do you.
Mm. Yeah.
Now, I absolutely adore my children.
Mm.
And if I could go back and decide and do it all again, as in decide whether or not to have them, I would totally have them every
Mm.
single time. But interestingly enough, I don't consider being a father my purpose.
Mm.
My what you do, my job, my contribution to society is I'm an engineer, but that's not my purpose.
Mm.
It's a means to an end. It's a means to feed myself and my family. Um, I've told you before, I was what through a lot of hard work and over time discovering what and this may change, what I know at this very particular moment to be true is that what my purpose is I'm here. My reason for being is to do one of two things. Sorry, is to do a combination of two things. One of them is to entertain.
Mm.
I believe that. I believe in some form I'm an entertainer. So to go back to simpler times, which is how I do that to help I think to simplify things allows me to think more clearly and to think in
Mm.
absolutes as well. So to go back to simpler times, after a day's hunt, which I wouldn't have
Yeah.
been on, by the way, unless I was
Yeah.
dragged along, because I don't consider myself much of a hunter or a warrior, but I certainly would have been the jester
Yeah.
or the clown, or as detrimental as that may sound, it's not meant to be.
Yeah.
I would have been the guy around the campfire telling everybody stories and getting them to laugh, maybe playing the guitar or the bongo drum, something like that, sort of
Yeah.
entertaining the troops
Mm.
and the village. The second one would be very much a philosopher. So I would look at
Mm.
us. I'm very good at looking at us. I believe I'm very good. More than believe, it's what feels true, what feels right to me. I
Yeah.
use the word right very, very deliberately. We can get into that, but um, you know, I feel completely everything within me feels in alignment and right when I'm
Mm.
philosophizing. So looking at
Yeah.
something and seeing what it could be as opposed to what it is, or how we could do
Mm.
something different, and completely uh, not related perhaps, but being an entertainer. So
Yeah.
doing this, what we're doing here right now, and it is a recent appointment for me, is possibly the only thing I've ever done. Other things have brought me pleasure. Again, my children, they bring me pleasure, but this is possibly the only thing I've ever done, and I discovered it almost by accident. Is that it's the only thing I've ever done that feels 100% right.
That's
And I'm not going to put any pressure on it. Like, people monetize these things. If it happens, it
yeah.
happens, but that's not why I do this.
Yeah.
I actually think in
Yeah.
some way, I don't know this yet. I need to
Mm.
think about it and come back to
Hold
it perhaps.
hold
But
hold
I
that
actually
thought.
think when you put,
I
sure.
just want to come back to those 2 points about what you said.
Hmm.
I'm just going to need to take a break because I'm going to swap over with Katie and I'll get back on to you
Hmm.
in just a second. So
Sure,
let
just
that
leave it running. That's fine.
leave it
No
running.
worries.
Okay, cool. No problem. What I'm
Yeah,
just going
what do you
to
think?
to get back into it, so in terms of what you were saying about, um, what you feel, purpose was the concept, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Was the fundamentally, I think
Couple of
that
things, but we can go at it from that. That's a good angle to attack it. Yeah.
I think if you've given it any sort of thought, real thought, and mulled over it like you have, and the fact that those two aspects of things that you've um, those two things that you've mentioned, quite frankly, the idea of bringing laughter and
Mm-hmm.
entertainment, create that's it's another form of creation. It's another form of, one of the sort of wonderful aspects of the kind of human spirit. Again, all stems from consciousness, because where is creativity? Where is imagination? If I cut your brain in half, I can't find, creative jokes flowing around. All I see is the neural correlates, which are a load of cells, and brain tissue. So where is this? All of this, it's in your consciousness, but you've thought about it quite a bit, and it brings you joy, and so you recognize that to be, um, something which you think is purposeful, which I agree with, by the way. And then the other aspect of, you call yourself, being philosophical. I
Mm-hmm.
think inherently that that those two things there that you've picked are the closest things that I've heard you tapping into your own conscious self, your true self, more than anything else that you know you've maybe identified with, talked about, or whatever. The reason being is that the
Based
idea
on the words
of
that I've said, or what you can actually feel
no,
it coming across when I talk about
no,
them.
yeah, no, basically, when you think about being a thinker, a philosopher, or whatever, the idea is seeking, right? Like trying
Mm-hmm.
to expand knowledge, looking into areas that
In the
don't have
pursuit of
foregone.
truth.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But the whole idea um, of kind of mindfulness and spirituality and all of that is just that. There are no conclusions. If you conclude,
Mm-hmm.
you go down a path of ignorance, because
Mm-hmm.
you're believing things, and
Mm-hmm.
believing is putting truth on things which don't essentially have a fact behind them.
Mm-hmm.
And so that actually is a very humanistic thing to do, to seek. Everybody, if I put you, um, in that room for long enough, after 2, 3, 4 days, you'll be crawling at the walls to get out of that room. Be like, get me out. I need to expand. I need to seek. And so, actually, that is very much
Mm.
in keeping with your
Expansion.
true expansion. It's very much in keeping with true human consciousness. Um, so, I agree with that. And then the fact
And that's
that
not just me, that's everybody.
that's everybody, right?
Mm-hmm.
Inherently, people they're just not aware of it. They've switched that
Mm-hmm.
aspect off. They're asleep. Every now and then I wake up. Type of. It was
They numb
famous. I think.
themselves to that.
I think there was a German physicist or poet or somebody who, most of the time I'm asleep, but every now and then I wake up, which is where he has these moments of consciousness.
Mm.
So that
And
actually
I've heard to,
is,
sorry to cut you, I've heard people who have had similar experiences to me when they come across things that feel right to them. I've heard them describe it as, I now feel awake.
yeah,
It's
transcendental
almost like you're,
kind of
yeah,
experiences.
you
Sure,
become
yeah.
unplugged from the matrix, even if it's for a moment.
Yeah, I mean, you can do it artificially. Pop a load of LSD, and it gives you a very similar sort of.
Oh,
Hence
really?
why there's, yeah, well, hence why there's a lot of, if done properly, there's a lot of benefit to. Why are they tying the benefits of psychedelics and mental health? Because it's getting people out of the perceptive reality is distorted. What they think they're seeing, smelling, seeing, feeling, hearing is not what they've always known it to be. So, they're appreciating that maybe what they're looking at is a bit of a lie. Um, their thoughts
Mm-hmm.
are totally, not, sorry, yeah, their thoughts are not governed by their emotions. They're able to almost step
Mm-hmm.
out of that. And so they find themselves in a place of what we feel is probable consciousness. I say probable because I don't have extensive. I have a little bit of experience with it, and I will very much agree with the fact that it's a very interesting experience and not too dissimilar from some of the things I've experienced fairly recently without having to dose myself with something. Um, so that's good
So
because it shows that.
what about
But the point
two
is that
questions
I would
on?
just wanted to
Yeah,
say about
sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to answer your question about being a comedian, bringing entertainment and laughter to people. Um, the reason why I think that's just such a great pursuit, purpose in life, not pursuit, purpose in life, is that if we remember
For
the sort
anyone?
of for anybody, absolutely, because the whole point of this is to have in an emotional sense, yes, feed yourself, drink yourself, stay alive, all those sort of basic needs. But then
Hmm.
after that,
Satisfy the
from an
physical
emotional,
elements.
yeah, tick box have to be done,
Yeah.
otherwise you die. No point having a conversation.
Hmm.
But past that,
Vitals are good.
if in an no, in an emotional sense, why wouldn't you want to just be joyful and happy? That would be great. That's
Right.
how everybody should
And
live.
blissful.
That's how and blissful, right? So when your emotions are really, really, at peace, on steroids, in a really, really good place, whatever you want to say it, you're blissful. And so, if you remember the idea of non-duality, which is a huge concept in the consciousness space, Vedantic space, whatever you want to call it, that I am everyone else. So if I bring joy to everyone else, I'm ultimately just bringing joy to myself because I am
Hmm.
everyone else. That kind of, so from answering my sort of own
Mm.
question version of that is, I if I'm helping other people feel better physically and mentally, I am quite directly making myself feel better physically and emotionally as well, and mentally, whatever term you want to use. I'm using them loosely at this stage, but you get the concept. Um,
Yeah, I do.
so yeah, joyful,
So
laughter,
do you
health.
think it's do you think that's not necessarily unique to me? Do you think that's um, perhaps shared by everyone on some level?
Yeah, I think so. I
Those
think
two things.
human beings like to laugh. It needs to be done in a sustainable way. It needs to come from a real source, like consciousness, where it's, joy rather than, short bursts of laughter, um, or overdoses of extreme laughter. It needs to be this bliss. You've used the right word. And I think if you can bring that state into, and, jokes and raising the kind of vibe of people around you are all tools to get people into that state. Um, but ultimately, if you get yourself into that state, other people will feel that state because they are you.
Law of state
You are them.
transference.
Yeah. Well, they. Yeah. Yeah. State transference. Yeah. It's a good.
Well, let me. I mean, again, it goes back to um, purpose, I suppose. I mean, I think
Mm,
I definitely agree with you that we all enjoy a laugh. Don't get
mm,
because otherwise there'd be no audience for me in which to make
mm.
laugh or to make to share stories with, to entertain um, with. But it doesn't. I'm sure we can all do that as we all do, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's someone's purpose.
Uh, no. If the sad reality of the situation is, and we should both be um, joyful about this because why not? But
Right.
both you and I will fail with our purposes.
Hmm.
Ultimately, we will both fail because if we succeeded, there would be no need for us anymore. People would be stress
Hmm.
free.
The curtain's drawn.
Yeah. But unfortunately, you and I we'll be in a job for a long time if we follow this
Well, it
purpose.
goes back
Because
to that ever never-ending need to expand, as you beautifully
yeah,
put it.
yeah,
We always want, it's part of the human condition almost to forever be expanding and to always want more, even
yeah,
to
and most human beings are switched off. So every now and then, if you can try and get them to wake up, it's
Mhm.
reminding you to stay awake at the same time. Um,
So
but
let me leave you with
yeah,
this then. On this last question, a
hmm
great way to wrap up. Let's go back
mm,
to simpler times, and we're living in a village.
hmm
Um, what are you doing, Abs? What do you think? Without thinking about it, just sort of answer. What do you think your contribution would be?
I think
Would
it
you
would
be
be
would you be I suppose in those days a doctor would be some sort of a healer.
yeah. I think it would be realistically, it would be the same thing that I'm doing now, just by just using different technology, different techniques, different
The
mediums,
technology of the
different
time,
language.
the understanding of
Yeah,
the collective understanding of the time.
yeah. Um, and I, I think I would try and so what I'm trying to do with my search for by expanding my search for expansion.
Mm,
One of the things I'm able to deliver with that is a more useful form of medicine, um, maybe a bit of a better understanding of it and how it could help. But ultimately, I think I'd just be doing what what you're doing, which is just trying to expand and trying to seek something. I think that's genuine.
mm,
To answer the question honestly, I don't think I would, if I'm like a great, you know, like some sort of architect or builder now, that I'd be knocking up little huts in a village somewhere. That's contextual to my education, to what I've been exposed to in the world. But I think in terms of my conscious self, I think the manifestation of it at the minute is being a doctor, one of the egos, one of the sort of hats.
mm,
But I think the thing driving that would be
mm.
seeking knowledge, understanding, that sort of thing, which is all based in
You,
consciousness.
you're totally right. I mean, being a doctor and the same as being an engineer is incredibly superficial. It's definitely one of those hats. It's an ego. It's an
Mm,
avatar that we're holding up.
mm,
It's because it's very specific, isn't it? But as you say,
mm.
as you perfectly just said, is there a greater meaning behind it, or is there not? Like with you, for example, you became a doctor because your parents were doctors, and there's a lot
Yeah,
of
yeah, yeah. Absolutely. It didn't come from a place of consciousness. It didn't come from a place of which the irony with my own field is that you know it it does lend itself massively to with the yogic practices and Ayurvedic medicine and all that. There is a lot of actual spirituality in the profession. But you can
mm,
give spirituality the meaning to any profession. It's not about the profession.
no,
It's I think that's the fundamental point.
it's
It's
the
the
meaning
place where
behind it.
yeah,
The
it's where it's
profession
coming
is
from.
just an ego.
Yeah,
It's just an
yeah.
avatar.
And to be honest, the way I practice medicine day to day, I still am bound within just for purely legal and you know NHS UK British Western working standards. I'm somewhat bound by that. Some of the things that I practice for myself are not entirely. I'm not allowed to apply some of those things from a legal standpoint.
Really,
You know, to an extent, yeah, to an extent. There's legal ramifications around, because
you want to
it's
be
it's
keeping
not that
that
I'm not
license, Abs.
allowed. It's well, it's not that I'm not allowed. It's just that it's massively impractical because I don't have um, an hour or two with one patient every single day,
Yeah,
and I
you're
can't
not a
take them
therapist.
through. No, no, exactly. And so that's where good old antidepressant is used way too much.
Mm-hmm. Got you.
So
And on that note, buddy, I think that's a really good place to end.